Chapter 1. The row of tall, narrow houses all in the same shade of ecru trailed up the gently sloping hill, with no end in sight. Everywhere in this well-kept neighborhood left a seamlessly uniform impression, and Rika Machida had begun to feel as if she were circling round and round a single spot. The hangnail on the finger of her right hand, by now as cold as ice, was sticking right out. It was the first time she got off at this stop on the Denentoshi commuter line. Perhaps because it had been designed for car-owning families, the streets of this suburban neighborhood, commonly considered the ideal place to raise children, were unfeasibly wide. With the map on her smartphone for guidance, Rika found herself traipsing through the area surrounding the station, which was teeming with housewives out to buy groceries for the evening meal. It was still hard for her to swallow the fact that Reiko had settled down here. The place was all mass retailers, family diners, and DVD rental shops. She hadn't passed a single bookshop that looked as if it had been there forever, or, in fact, any shop that appeared to be owned by an individual and not a corporation. There was not the slightest whiff of either culture or history. The previous week, Rika had taken a day trip to a town on the southern island of Kyushu to research a crime she was covering involving a young boy. The town had been overwhelmingly residential, with only the odd local supermarket and occasional sign for a cram school interrupting the sea of houses and apartment buildings. She'd passed a couple of high school girls wearing skirts of a length she'd never seen in Tokyo. Walking alone through the neighborhood, the kind of place she would never visit if it wasn't for her work, Rika had felt her existence growing distant, as though her entire self, her entire life, were being erased. At least here there was a place ready and waiting to welcome her, Rika told herself, in a bid to haul back her consciousness. With that, she set foot inside the shop, which she'd resolved would be the last she'd try. That scent unique to supermarkets of cool apples and wet cardboard enveloped her gently. At a stand on the supermarket floor, a middle-aged woman was frying meat on a hot plate, cutting it into bite-sized pieces as she called out to customers in a high-pitched voice, entreating them to try it. Rika picked up one of the packs of pork on display. How long had it been since she'd looked at produce up close like this? The pretty pink-colored meat and shining white fat jostled for place with each other, cool and moist. She and Reiko had been texting since Rika had passed Futako Tamagawa Station. Reiko had offered to come and meet her at the station, but Rika had said there was no need and asked instead if there was anything that she could pick up on her way. That morning, Rika had returned home in the early hours and fallen into bed, sleeping till after lunch. She'd showered and worked on her preparatory report, then headed out to Shibuya for a meeting with a regular columnist. At some point, noticing the time with a start, she'd hurriedly brought the meeting to a close and leapt onto a train. There had been no time to go shopping. Reiko might have been a close friend, but their familiarity didn't assuage Rika's guilt about visiting her new marital home empty-handed. Reiko's reply came immediately, along with a cartoon rabbit sticker. It seemed that after having given up work last year, her silly side had finally returned. If you're sure, then would you bring me some butter if you can find it? There's a shortage this winter, and I can't get my hands on any. But if you can, it really doesn't matter. I'd rather you got here quickly. The dairy section was bathed in a placid yellow light. On the bottom rack was an empty space about 5 shelves wide, with a notice taped in place. Due to product shortages, supplies of butter are limited to 1 item per customer. Rika had been to 3 supermarkets now, and in each one it had been the same story. Resigning herself to the reality of the situation, Rika picked up the richest, butteriest-looking margarine variety from the selection and quickly made her way to the cash registers. Reiko's new house lay a 5-minute walk from the station, on a gently sloping hill. The 3-story property, indistinguishable from those around it, had been designed to maximize space on the plot of land, no more than 100 square meters in size. The Toyota fitted so neatly into the parking space, it looked as though it had been made to measure. Alongside the front door was a line of planters with daisies, violas, and other kinds of flowers, while on the door hung an ivy wreath. This clear expression of Reiko's personality reassured Rika. Pushing the button to the intercom, she found herself exhaling in relief. "Rika, you're here." Wow, how long has it been? No sooner was the door opened than Reiko had bolted out in her apron and was hugging her. Rika returned the embrace, wrapping her arms around Reiko's slender shoulders. At 5'5" in height, Rika was significantly taller than petite, delicate Reiko, and when she hugged her, could encircle her fully with her long arms. The violet-like aroma that was Reiko's signature scent rose up from her hair. Rika felt her eyes growing hot. Perhaps, she thought, perhaps without realizing it I've been starved of these expressions of affection, of the warmth of another human body. The intensity of the greeting wasn't for show either. The two friends had spent practically every day in each other's company at university, but they were well into adulthood now and 6 months had passed since they'd last seen one another. Even after Reiko had given up her job, the busy nature of Rika's work made it hard to find time to meet. In theory, Rika had Tuesday and Wednesday to herself each week, but she didn't know any of her colleagues who actually managed to take proper days off, except for maybe Kitamura, a junior member of staff. Today was a Wednesday, but she'd had a meeting with a columnist earlier, and after finishing up at Reiko's, she planned to go back to the office to do some research. Rika could make out the aroma of dashi and melted cheese emanating from inside Reiko's house, fusing with that scent of fresh wood characteristic of new builds. Putting on the warm fabric house slippers that her friend laid out for her, allowing her trench coat to be hung up, she moved down the shiny, immaculate parquet flooring of the hall towards a room illuminated by a lambent orange light. The living room that led on to the kitchen was a very average sort of space, but thanks to the Liberty print sofas and curtains, the dresser and bookshelves of antique dark wood, and the collages on the wall by an artist Rika didn't know, it had the feel of a cozy attic room. In fact, it reminded Rika of the apartment in Oyamadai where Reiko had previously lived by herself. Rika rinsed her mouth and washed her hands at the bathroom sink, then wiped off her hands on one of numerous fluffy hand towels that lay piled in a basket. Catching the delicate fragrance of fabric softener on the towels, Rika resolved to ask Reiko what brand she used, although it wasn't the sort of thing that she'd usually notice. "I'm really sorry, Ray. Not only am I late, but all I could find was this." Rika took out of the supermarket bag the offending item, a packet labeled margarine made with 50% butter, and held it out sheepishly to her friend. "Amazing. Thank you." Reiko smiled and moved to the fridge to put the margarine away. If she were being honest, Rika couldn't really tell the difference between butter and margarine. "I went round and round all the supermarkets here, but there was no butter to be found. It's like in the story of Little Babaji, going round and ending up as butter." Giggling to herself, Reiko skipped back to where Rika stood in the living room, where she pulled an illustrated book off the shelf and held it out triumphantly. Now she saw it, Rika had the sense that she had, indeed, read the book back when she was in nursery, but only had the haziest recollection of it. "I've started buying picture books that I think might be good for the baby." The way that Reiko spoke made it seem as if her baby already existed in the world, Rika thought, as if they were all just waiting for it to appear in the room. It was the previous summer that the obstetrician had told Reiko it was likely that stress was to blame for the fact that 2 years into her marriage, she still hadn't conceived. And Reiko had promptly quit her job in the PR department of a major film production company, which was so hectic that even finding time to make medical appointments had been difficult. Now Rika stole a sideways glance at her friend, who was leafing through the picture book with evident pleasure. There were still no signs that she was pregnant, yet she had an aura of maternal calm about her. She seemed much more at ease than when she'd been working. Not only was her skin now free of makeup and her hair glossy and lustrous, but her light brown eyes seemed to sparkle, and her lips had a petal-like fullness to them. Under her ditzy print skirt, she wore navy leggings and woolen leg warmers, presumably to protect herself from the cold. Her outfit was incomparably more casual than anything she'd worn in her working days, but she still looked stylish, with a touch of Parisian chic about her. So tiny and girlish in her looks was she that it was hard to believe she was 33, the same age as Rika herself. When Reiko had resolved to give up the job that she was so good at, Rika had thought it a waste. Not just that, Her friend's decision had produced in her a sense of loneliness and resentment that had left her sleepless. They had argued about it several times over the phone. Peering over Reiko's shoulder to read the picture book, Rika found herself transported back to their time at university, when she and Reiko had often shared textbooks in the lecture hall. While out walking in the jungle, the young boy, little Babaji, encounters a group of 4 tigers who steal his clothes and possessions. In their new finery, the tigers become distracted arguing over which is the grandest. Forgetting all about little Babaji, they begin snapping at one another, biting each other's tails until they've formed a ring around a tree. Clamped together, they start chasing each other round and round, going so fast that they begin to melt into a yellow butter. Babaji's father finds the butter and brings it home, and there the melted tigers are slathered on hotcakes, ending up in the Babaji family's stomachs. This cruel turn of events is narrated with the utmost matter-of-factness. Babaji's family are quite merciless, don't you think? Said Reiko when they reached the end. I feel a bit sorry for the tigers. What are you saying? Responded Rika. It's the tigers who are to blame. They tried to eat Babaji first, remember? I think the moral is that you shouldn't let your vanity make you so competitive that you're driven to self-destruction. As the two were immersed in dissecting the book, the door opened. Rika, you're here already, said Ryosuke. Good to see you. It seemed to Rika unthinkably early for Reiko's husband, who worked in the sales department of a medium-sized confectionery manufacturer, to be getting home from work. Ryosuke had been a quarterback in the American football team at college and was exceptionally well-built. His most distinctive features were his eyes, which were always scrunched up into an amiable smile, and his rosy cheeks, like those of a small child. At first glance, he seemed like a person with whom Reiko would have little to talk about. The pair had been brought together by the PR campaign for a film. Reiko's company had commissioned Ryosuke's confectionery firm to make promotional tarts featuring the lead actress. In the meetings that followed, it was Reiko who'd taken a liking to him first. She'd known the first time she set eyes on him, she said, it had to be him. Ryosuke was initially nonplussed by the way that Reiko, who seemed out of his league, had pursued him so intently, but had taken to her more introspective, innocent side. Having grown up in a rowdy family of 5, to parents who got on well and together ran an izakaya in the part of Saitama where they lived, Ryosuke had an open, laid-back way about him that alone was enough to attract Reiko. The itchy, jealous feelings that Rika had once harbored towards her friend's spouse had by now died down, though it was true to say that when she'd seen Reiko in her wedding dress, Rika had felt as though a piece of her own self had been stolen away. Reiko set down on the table a selection of large plates, each of a different design and glaze, and the meal began. Banya cotta with a plentiful variety of steamed winter vegetables and a rich anchovy sauce, thinly cut slices of warm salt pork, a tofu and leek gratin, rice cooked in an earthenware pot with vegetables and chopped oysters, and miso soup. The dishes had a vitality to them which came from using only the freshest ingredients, and though the seasoning was unobtrusive, all the flavors had pleasing depth. Weren't oysters supposed to be good for fertility? Rika thought as she brought to her lips a mouthful of rice enriched with soy sauce, whose smell put her in mind of the sea, shooting a glance over at her friend. She realized that she had more of an appetite than she could remember having in a long time, and that if this was largely owing to how delicious the food was, it was also in part to do with the way Ryosuke ate, as if in a state of ecstasy. It is okay to have seconds? This pork is unbelievably tender. Honestly, you could serve this in a restaurant. His eyes narrowed to threads of satisfaction. Ryosuke held out his empty plate to his wife. Watching Reiko serving him her food with an air of great pride, Rika felt once again that she understood why Reiko had chosen him. Suddenly she felt embarrassed about when she deemed the area bereft of culture earlier. They must have selected this neighborhood together, planning their future based on Ryosuke's salary, prioritizing safety and convenience. Reiko had no intention of relying on her family for any financial support. I know people say this all the time, but this honestly makes me think I need a wife. You're a lucky man, Ryosuke. Rika felt genuine envy for Ryosuke, who sat in front of her with a carefree smile. He seemed to exude such a sense of ease, his skin glowing and his expression relaxed. At work, too, Rika noticed that the married men of the older generation had a certain leisurely quality about them, in spite of how busy their days were. It seemed that most of their wives were homemakers. Rika had never considered that kind of life for herself, but she could see the power such women bestowed upon their families. Every night, those women would clean out the toxins that had built up in their partners' bodies and souls over the course of the day, toxins that, if left untouched for too long, would eat a person away. The elder male colleague of hers who had died unexpectedly at home last month had been single and lived alone. An image rose up in Rika's mind of her own cold apartment, which she hadn't cleaned in some time. His had probably looked a lot like that. The apartment also closely resembled the one her father had inhabited by himself after his divorce. You should bring your boyfriend along next time. I've still never met him, you know. Oh yeah, now you mention it, I do have a boyfriend. Rika suppressed a smile at her own train of thought. Makoto Fujimura worked in the literary publishing section of Rika's company. Perhaps because they had started out as friends, their relationship was hardly what you could call romantic. During the week, the most they saw of one another was crossing paths in the corridor at work. All in all, they met maybe twice a month if they were lucky, when one of them stayed over at the other's apartment. And yet Makoto was still an invaluable presence in her life, a person with whom to share life's respective burdens, and she was grateful too for the well-judged distance between them. Rika, what do you eat these days? Reiko asked. Are you looking after yourself properly? You look like you've lost weight again. I was reading something the other day saying that the average calorie consumption of Japanese women today is lower than the levels recorded right after the Second World War. That wouldn't surprise me. Honestly, I've neither the time nor the energy to cook. I don't even own a rice cooker. I mean, what'd be the point when I'd never use it? Most evenings I'm out entertaining bureaucrats or else having dinner with someone whose story I'm covering. Entertaining bureaucrats, eh? I bet you get treated to all sorts of delicacies that mere mortals like us couldn't even dream of, said Ryosuke. With this, Rika recalled the hours she'd spent the previous night in an expensive Ginza restaurant, where she'd been treated just like a waitress at a hostess bar whose job it was to entertain and flirt with men. Most bureaucrats would, from time to time, come up with a convenient misinterpretation of the situation, would decide, for example, that a female journalist was approaching them not because she needed something to write about, but because she was attracted to them. The leek from the gratin, so soft and melting in its texture, suddenly tasted bitter in her mouth, and she switched topic. I don't understand anything about flavor, that's the problem. My taste buds are like a child's. I'm perfectly happy with convenience store bento boxes and curry from cheap restaurants. Food and fashion, the things that women were supposed to have a particular fondness for, had always left Rika indifferent. At her height, though, it was easy for her to look stocky, and she took care that her weight never exceeded 50 kilos. Perhaps that was in part the legacy of her mother, who had been very conscious of such things. Rika tried not to eat late at night. If she was entertaining clients and they ordered food, she only touched the vegetables and soup. In the convenience store outside the office that she went to twice a day, she went for healthy foods like yogurt, salad, and haricame noodles. She didn't have the time to go to the gym, but she tried to walk everywhere she could. Her slim physique ensured that, despite not being a remarkable beauty, she would still be complimented, and that the fast fashion items she chose haphazardly suited her figure just fine. Rika was in an industry where maintaining one's appearance tended to be rewarded with professional success. Back in her girls' school, too, her long, narrow eyes and slender boy's face had earned her many letters of admiration from younger girls. I don't think your sense of taste is lacking, Rika. Misaki always says that she didn't have any time for proper cooking, but she did a far better job as a single mother than my parents managed as a pair. Reiko was on first-name terms with Rika's mother and referred to her affectionately as Misaki. Rika's parents had divorced soon after she'd started secondary school, and her mother took the split as an opportunity to take up co-ownership of a boutique that her friend had started up. She received no money from the divorce, and knowing they could expect no financial support from Rika's father, her mother worked constantly. She'd never been a particularly talented cook, but while married to Rika's father, she had tried to grace the dinner table with a variety of dishes. Once she began working, however, she turned to her daughter and said, "I'm sorry to ask this, but do you mind giving me a hand from now on?" In response, Rika channeled all her energy into helping out. She made sure that the cleaning and washing was done before her mother got home from work and would cook the rice and make the miso soup. When her mother got home after 8, she would bring a couple of deli items, which would form the main dishes for the pair's late dinner. There may have been no elaborate home-cooked recipes, but neither was there any of the tense atmosphere that had prevailed when her father had been around. Many evenings they'd meet in a family diner to eat. Something about this way of life resembled being away at summer camp, an extension of going out with friends, which Rika liked. The sense that she was being relied upon built her confidence. This rhythm they'd established had continued until Rika left home at the age of 22. As her boutique began to grow in popularity, Rika's mother went abroad more frequently to search out new products, and some months Rika spent more time with her grandparents in Okusawa than at home, but to this day she and her mother remained close. Rika hadn't gone through a rebellious phase. She'd made all the decisions about her university studies and her future career alone, and seen them through. Her industrious mother, who was now over 60, still worked on the shop floor in the second branch of the boutique in Jugaoka. Back in their university days, Reiko had often come over to cook in the Hitanadai apartment where Rika lived with her mother. Both Rika and her mother were astonished to discover what a good cook Reiko was. Even when making simple meals like okazuke or pasta, her little additions of yuzu rind or salted lemon displayed her inventiveness, giving her dishes the sort of taste that made you want to take your time savoring them. The only child of the owners of a well-known hotel in Kanazawa, Reiko had a stubborn sense of aesthetics and a rebellious spirit that you would never have guessed at from her refined appearance. From Reiko's childhood on, her parents had been de facto separated, but continued to live under the same roof. Both openly had lovers, and neither of them had much time for their daughter. For Reiko, who had spent much of her childhood alongside their housekeeper whose cooking skills were, by her own admission, first-rate, the taste of home, meant a table clustered with exquisite decorative tranchas and tiny dishes whose calorific contents had been perfectly calculated. "If I ever have a son or a daughter, I want them to grow up eating food and cakes that I've made," Reiko had said time and again. "I'm studying now so that when the time comes, I'll be able to make the kind of healthy food that they'll want to eat lots of." Their backgrounds may have been worlds apart, but Reiko and Rika shared the experience of holding, throughout their girlhoods, a sense of unease towards the kind of family that the rest of the world idealized. That might have been why Rika thought, when their eyes had met in the enrollment ceremony, she'd summoned up the courage to speak to Reiko. Now Reiko looked up at Rika, face alive with curiosity. "Tell me about your work. Last time we spoke, you were trying to get permission to cover Manako Kajii. What happened with that?" Manako Kajii was the suspect convicted in a case involving several suspicious deaths in Tokyo, and which had been creating a stir in the media for years now. Using a dating service specifically for people looking to get married, she had extorted money from a succession of men and stood accused of killing 3 of them. Her blog, a string of descriptions of extravagant foods and other luxuries, which she had kept updating right up until the day before her capture, had caused a sensation in the wake of her arrest. She had passed her time going to restaurants and ordering special dishes, and also took pride in her own abilities as a cook. The media never seemed to tire of her case, whose online aspect made it so very contemporary. Kajii was currently in the Tokyo detention house awaiting her retrial. The case of Manako Kajii, or Kajimana, as she was known in the mass media, had intrigued Rika ever since her arrest. Rika had been part of a different news team at the time, but the case had continued to niggle at her, and she was now approaching the age that Kajii had been at the time of her arrest. The election coverage she'd been involved with up until now was wrapping up, and it seemed that she would finally be able to start pursuing stories at her own discretion. "I bet Kajimana eats an absolute ton. That's why she's that huge. It's a miracle that someone that fat could con so many people into wanting to marry her. Is her cooking that good, or what? Ryosuke said. A chill ran down Rika's spine. She saw a frown flit across Reiko's brow and then disappear. Reiko had always been even more sensitive to misogyny than Rika herself was. But it wasn't that Ryosuke was particularly insensitive. What he'd just given voice to was, Rika supposed, the standard response of the average man. The reason the case had garnered so much attention was that this woman, who had led several men around by the nose and maintained such a queenly presence in the courtroom, was neither young nor beautiful. From what Rika could see from the photographs, she weighed over 70 kilos. Rather than trying to find a new lead in her case, what I'm interested in is the social background to it all. I feel that the whole case is steeped in intense misogyny. Everyone in it, from Kajimana herself to her victims and all the men involved, seems to have a deep-seated hatred of women. I don't know whether I can really get that aspect across in a men's weekly magazine like ours, but I want to try. I've written to her several times, though, and had no response. I've even been to Tokyo Detention House twice in person, but it seems she has no intention of meeting me. I've been lonely so long that if I can find a woman to take care of me when I'm old, I don't really care how ugly she is. I don't care who she is, so long as she's the domestic type who'll make me dinner. She might be fat, but she's a real Cossack princess type. There's something unworldly and untouched about her. All three victims had come out with statements like these to the people close to them while they'd been still alive. They clearly had a powerful need for Kajii and had presented her with significant sums of money, and yet in the presence of third parties, had repeatedly made disdainful statements about her. In court, the prosecution had thrown considerations such as alibis and solid evidence to the wind in order to launch attacks on Kajii's concept of chastity, so their line of argument veered about wildly, and the trial had made slow, painstaking progress. One of the witnesses, a female care worker for the elderly, was interrogated in a manner that many felt to be sexual harassment. The debate around the case was split down gender lines. Something that a prominent male critic had said on the topic had been deemed misogynist, and he had eventually been forced to apologize. The last victim, what was his name again? You know, the guy who was kind of famous in online otaku circles? Just before he was run over by the train, he'd eaten beef stew that Manako Kajii had cooked for him. I wonder if that was something she learned to make at that French cooking school. What's it called again? Oh yes, Le Salon de Mayuko. It seemed from the information she had at her disposal as though Reiko had been avidly reading up on the case, both in the weekly magazines and online. She liked to have her finger on the pulse, keeping up to date with the latest news and trends, and she was also the industrious, diligent type, with a passion for research. At university, she had consistently been top of her class. Le Salon de Mayuko was a women-only cooking school that was well known among a certain social elite. It had been set up by Mayuko Sasazuka, wife of Mr. Sasazuka, the owner-chef of the famous French restaurant Balzac in the affluent Nishiazabu district of Tokyo. On Balzac's day off, Mayuko Sasazuka, who herself worked in the restaurant with her husband, took over the premises to run the cooking school, whose selling point was that its students not only had full run of the Balzac kitchen, including the professional ovens and cooking equipment used by its chefs, but would cook with the restaurant's finest quality ingredients. At 15,000 yen a lesson, the fees for the thrice-monthly classes were far from cheap, and a year's attendance would set you back over 500,000 yen. Nor did graduating from the course give students any kind of certification or ability to turn professional. The classes were rather like an extremely opulent pastime, permitted only to wealthy housewives and women with high salaries. Up until 2 months before her arrest, Manako Kajii had been avidly attending the school, with her fees paid for by one of her victims. A quick search on the internet soon yielded a group photograph from the salon, showing Kajii standing with the other students. Among that group of stylish women attired with impeccable taste, Kajii, in a tight-fitting dress that accentuated her voluptuous figure and would have been more suitable for a ritzy date than a cooking school, stood out like a sore thumb. Now, after being hounded by the press, the cooking school was on a break. Yes, apparently right before the victim died, he sent a text to his mother. My girlfriend made me beef stew. It was delicious. Remember the argument of Kajii's lawyer in court? Would a woman who'd spend all that time cooking up a delicious beef stew for her lover really push that same man in front of a train? Listen, Rika, next time you write to her, why don't you try asking her if she'll share the recipe with you? I bet she'll agree to meet you after that. Rika blinked. The idea had never even occurred to her. Back in her time working in PR, Reiko had often used her thoughtfulness, humor, and talent for conceiving of unexpected gifts to win over difficult film directors, talent agency presidents, and sponsors, and bring them round to her way of seeing things. Women who love to cook are so delighted when someone asks them for a recipe that they'll tell you all kinds of things you haven't asked for along with it. It's a law of nature. I'm exactly the same. It's true, Ryosuke piped up. A little while ago, one of my colleagues came round with his wife and kids and was really impressed by the shumai that Reiko made. So Reiko started telling him in detail how to make them, the kinds of steamer you need and all this. She got so carried away that he was quite taken aback, he said, laughing. Hey, Rio, I wouldn't mind going to Le Salon de Mayuko one day. Not on my kind of salary, I'm afraid. Dessert was homemade candied chestnuts, chiffon cake baked with amazake and rice flour, and cups of gingery chai. Biting into the cake, Rika discovered that it was perfectly fluffy, with a pleasing springiness and bite to it. Yet when she widened her eyes and sang its praises, Reiko frowned remorsefully. What with Christmas coming up, I wanted to make a thick buttercream bûche de Noël, but of course without any butter that's off the table. Rika had a look as well, Rio, but it seems like there really isn't any to be found around here. At this rate, pound cakes and sponges won't be on the menu for a while. We're left with chiffon cake, I guess. It's about the only thing you can make with rapeseed oil. But this is so dense and squidgy, even without it. It's great. It looks like the butter shortage is going to drag on anyway. They're saying that with the heat last summer, lots of dairy cows got mastitis, and that's what's causing it. But this is after they forecast a supply shortage and imported a load at the last minute as an emergency measure. So where's it all got to? I wonder. Saying that, though, there are fewer and fewer dairy farmers in Japan these days. I'm guessing that there'll come a time in the future when we'll just import all our dairy products from overseas. In any case, it's a real blow for a small company like ours. As she listened to Ryosuke and made the appropriate responses, Rika recalled that Manako Kajii had a soft spot for butter. Rika's interest in food was so limited that she'd only skimmed Kajii's blog, but she did remember that Kajii had gone on and on about expensive brands of butter. Come to think of it, there'd been a discussion in court about how Kajii had taken one of her victims' credit cards and used it to buy numerous packets of butter costing nearly 2,000 yen a pop. Kajii had grown up in Niigata, surrounded by dairy farms, so maybe that explained her pickiness. Her fixation had been thoroughly mocked online, with people making comments like, "No wonder she's that big if she eats so much butter," and "It wouldn't surprise me if she used her sticks of butter for you-know-what." Just past 9, Rika said her goodbyes, politely rebuffing the pair's entreaties for her to stay longer, to sleep over and leave in the morning. With the onigiri made of the oyster and vegetable rice and the piece of chiffon cake wrapped in cling film that Reiko had handed her tucked inside her bag, Rika headed for the office. I only want to spend my time with people who know the real thing when they see it. People who truly understand the value of the real thing are few and far between. These kinds of lines appeared frequently in Manako Kajii's blog. Someone who knew the real thing when they saw it. Surely it was hard to find anyone that applied to better than Reiko, thought Rika. In front of the ticket gates, Rika turned around and looked back once more at the neighborhood. The cluster of lights from the new houses leading up the hill now seemed to her warm and inviting. When she reached for her train pass, she noticed that her fingertips looked less dry than earlier and her hangnail less severe. By focusing solely on the question of whether the victim was wrong to permit or encourage the taking of the photographs, the revenge porn debate has swung way off course. So long as we keep up this culture of victim blaming, these kinds of cases will continue to happen. The speaker's black-suited forearms flung out haphazardly across the panelist's bench were unusually long. His graying cheeks were drawn, his dark hair was speckled with white, and his eyes, so googled that they seemed ready to drop out at any minute, were cushioned by unhealthy-looking black bags. He was hardly what you'd call a dreamboat. And yet, every time his fierce expression relaxed a little, every time his Adam's apple traveled up his long neck, Rika would find herself fixed on the sight of him. Here he was on a morning chat show, speaking about the case where an office worker from Hamamatsucho had been strangled to death after naked photographs of her were leaked online by her ex-boyfriend. "Oh, Shinoi's doing these kinds of programs now, is he?" came a voice from behind her. It was her colleague Kitamura, for years her junior. "I suppose that, despite that gangster face of his, he's got a sexy aura." For a man in his mid-40s, his opinions are pretty sympathetic to women, so he probably goes down well with housewives. And he's in good shape for his age. "You think," said Rika, doing her best to look as disinterested as possible as she smiled and looked away from the screen, picking up the remote that lay on the old sofa. Yoshinori Shinoi, a senior editor at a major news agency who had recently become a household name thanks to his media appearances, had been a well-known figure to everyone in Rika's department for a good while, having long been prized as a go-to person for opinions on various issues. The space she and Kitamura were now in, with its battered corner sofa and TV, was the perfect place for taking a breather. You could even have a quick nap there if you weren't bothered about being caught in the act. Looking up at the walls stained yellow from the nicotine that escaped the door of the smoking room directly ahead of her, Rika turned down the sound of the TV. Within the offices of Shimaisha, one of Japan's biggest publishing companies, the only department with a smoking room was this one, that of the Shumi Weekly. This meant that the heavy smokers from other departments such as books and sales would all come here especially, and the footfall was high. The only time you could truly zone out around here was on mornings like these, when there were few people around. Rika had come into the office early, but sitting on the sofa, she found herself losing any sense of urgency. She took an onigiri, this morning's breakfast, out of the convenience store plastic bag and unwrapped its cellophane coating. She'd asked the cashier to microwave it for her, and the rice was still pleasantly warm. While inspecting the wide variety of onigiri lining the shelves of the convenience store, much as she always did, Rika found herself pining for the meal Reiko had cooked for her last week, including the oyster and vegetable rice. And her hand had grasped the takikomi onigiri, a variety she never usually chose. On the subject of this Hamamatsucho revenge porn case, our scoop that the suspect had engaged in stalkerish behavior towards two of his exes, but not been prosecuted for it came via you, right? You were the first to point that out. Kitamura was settling himself down beside Rika on the sofa, addressing her chummily as if they were friends at school. His fitted striped shirt clung to his slim figure, which showed not a trace of spare flesh, and his dyed flax-brown hair suited his pale skin. He had the air of a pampered princess, and indeed, he got more sleep than anyone else around here, neither drank nor smoked, and was the first to get round to the books and films that people were raving about. He had a nonchalant ease about him, and his perspective on matters was roundly neutral. Not only did he never get angry, but he never got ill either, so his presence was much treasured by the company, despite his lack of professional zeal. "Oh, that was just a fluke," replied Rika. "Man, I can't face the editorial meeting today. I've got nothing remotely decent to bring. Whenever I think I've landed a scoop, it gets leaked online. I wouldn't worry about it. With an old man paper like ours, we're guaranteed to keep selling copies so long as we keep featuring articles about warding off inheritance tax and cancer. We're just here to keep things ticking over. It's about time we started running articles like 10 ways to keep having sex until you die. It was a Thursday, the day when all the journalists revealed the scoops they'd landed and the stories they wanted to cover in the upcoming issue. On Friday, the editors would announce the lineup for the magazine accordingly, and the weekend would be spent doing the necessary coverage and writing up drafts in time for Monday's deadline. This week-long circuit, which felt a lot like sprinting round a running track, was repeated 4 times a month, which was to say 48 times a year. Having worked at the company for a decade now, this rhythm was steeped into Rika's body, and whether she was waking or sleeping, she couldn't rid herself of the sensation of running its course. Of the 70 members of the magazine team, 10 were photographers, 8 were admin, 11 were on the editorial desk, and the rest were journalists. Rika was the sole female journalist who was also a permanent contract employee. Of the 4 other women who had joined the company at the same time as her, 2 had requested to be transferred to other departments, and 2 had left for health reasons. The women who had joined the company before her and shown her around had married and moved to other departments, books or sales. The job was impossible to manage alongside pregnancy and childcare unless you had magical powers. If you keep landing scoops as you are doing, I wouldn't be surprised if Rika Machida became the first woman on the Shumi Weekly editorial desk. That'd be so great. At the Shumi Weekly, the task of writing up the journalists' reports into publishable articles was exclusively the work of the editorial desk. It was Rika's goal to one day have something printed that she'd written with her own hand. What are you saying, Kitamura? I know you're not remotely jealous. Kitamura's lack of professional ambition concerning anything other than shaving as many seconds as he could off the time he spent at work was so brazen that by this stage everybody practically respected him for it. He might not have come up with stories of his own, but this also ensured he had no emotional attachment towards what he was covering. As a result, his work was accurate, and he got it done quicker than anybody else. Though today, for once, it seemed as though there was something he wanted to say. The scoops that you come up with are pretty wide in scope, from arts to sports, and there's no pattern to them. This might sound rude, but from what I've seen, however frequently female journalists meet with police and bureaucrats, they seem to find it hard to get those guys to open up, however attractive they're seen to be. The relationship between the weekly magazine journalists and their sources is a thoroughly homosocial one, and it's been that way basically since the Second World War. Female journalists put in the same amount of time and energy as their male counterparts, but it's the men who are trusted, and the women's stories get snapped up by them as a result. Despite superficial similarities, the rice of the onigiri had none of the fragrance or the depth of flavor of Reiko's. Rika could feel its warmth on her tongue, yet as soon as the rice moved down her throat, a coldness spread out through her body. She washed the onigiri down with bottled green tea, driving out the grains caught behind her teeth with a pointed tongue. In the corner of her vision, Shinoi was nodding at the presenter. If you're managing to line up so many scoops, you must have a pretty amazing source. Though I guess you're not about to reveal it to me. There was no way, Rika told herself, that someone like Kitamura could have figured it out. Even if he had, there was a limit to how interested he'd be. Not letting her smile slip, she met Kitamura's light-colored eyes. In this industry, a casual utterance, a misjudged confidence, could cost you your life. Ensuring that your true feelings were well masked, inspecting each and every one of your actions, and keeping yourself in check became a matter of habit. Excuse me, Ms. Machida? Do you have plans to get rid of this box anytime soon? It was Yu Uchimura, a university student who worked at the office part-time, the irritation in her voice palpable. Now it had been determined that you would be joining the company full-time next year. The restraint she'd previously shown had disappeared. Grateful for the interruption, Rika stood up and turned her back on Kitamura. Oh, sorry. I'll get it sent over to my place soon. Racing over to her desk, she pushed the cardboard box that was sticking out into the aisle back underneath her desk and sat down at her chair. As it turned out, when 3 years' worth of the blog was printed out, it accounted for a whole box full of paper. The entries were lengthy, and Manako Kajii updated her blog several times a day, so the volume quickly mounted up. The blog had now been deleted, but one of her sources had saved a copy, and that was how Rika had come to have it. She took 5 days' worth out of the box and flicked through it. Kajii's life, whose days were spent shopping and eating, seemed to float free from the constraints of ordinary people's lives, like that of an aristocrat. There were countless descriptions of the types of confectionery and wines considered the best that money could buy, endless lists of famous shops and restaurants in central Tokyo, Sambikia, the New York Grill, Joel Robuchon, Nada Man, Maxims de Paris, Lecrin. All of them were such traditional, established choices that even Rika had heard of them, which gave the blog's contents the feel of having been sponged from someone else, even when Kajii was ostensibly recording her own impressions. However many times Rika passed her eyes over the text, it wouldn't sink in. Manako Kajii had been born in Fuchu, Tokyo in 1980. When it was decided that her father would help out his own father with his property business, the family had moved to Yasudamaki in Niigata. Kajii's mother taught flower arranging. Along with her sister, 7 years her junior, Kajii had been brought up in relative affluence. She moved to Tokyo for university, but dropped out after 3 months. From that point on, she had been living in Futome in Shinagawa, taking no fixed employment and instead making her living as a professional mistress, protected by the peculiar network of rich, older men she'd established. She had been arrested in 2013 on suspicion of committing 3 murders that had taken place over the course of roughly 6 months. All of the victims were single men between 40 and 70, based in the capital, whom she had met through dating sites, and who were serious about marrying her. In response to Kajii's requests for money, the fees for her cooking school, medical costs for a family member who'd injured themselves, and so on, they'd handed over handsome sums of cash. Their various causes of death, an overdose of sleeping pills, drowning in the bathtub, falling in front of a train, could all be read as either suicide or sheer accident. But the deciding factor in Kajii's arrest had been the emergence of the information that in each case, she'd been with them right up until their deaths. She was also being tried for 5 charges of fraud. Despite a lack of concrete evidence for any of the charges against her, Kajii had been sentenced to life imprisonment, the jury apparently convinced by the prosecution's questionable psychologizing. Kajii had appealed the decision that same day and was currently in Tokyo Detention House, awaiting her retrial next spring. She was well known for refusing to meet anyone from the press and was apparently particularly icy towards female journalists. What the public found most alarming, even more than Kajii's lack of beauty, was the fact that she was not thin. Women appeared to find this aspect of the case profoundly disturbing, while in men it elicited an extraordinary display of hatred and vitriol. From early childhood, everyone had had it drummed into them that if a woman wasn't slim, she wasn't worth bothering with. The decision not to lose weight and remain plus-sized was one that demanded considerable resolve. And yet, Kajii had given herself that permission. Ignoring other people's yardsticks, she had decided that she was enough as a woman. To be treated well, to be adored, to be showered with presence and affection, and to eschew that which she disliked, including work and group socializing. She went on demanding these things as though they were perfectly within her rights, and as a result, she had carved out for herself an environment she found comfortable, in which she could live apart from the world. It was this accomplishment, more than the close to 100 million yen she had managed to extract from various men, that seemed to Rika deserving of admiration. In principle, all women should give themselves permission to demand good treatment, but the world made doing so profoundly difficult. The women labeled the highly successful ones whom Rika encountered through her work showed that ever so clearly. All of them seemed terrified of something. They reined themselves in to a degree that verged on asceticism, were abnormally modest, and seemed desperate to protect themselves. Rika herself, however much she was praised by others, however highly her work was esteemed, was unable to feel satisfaction with any aspect of her own self. On the nights when her confidence failed her, and she was struck by the urge to call Makoto and ask him to come over, she would keep herself in check, telling herself that she wouldn't get away with being so demanding. Even Reiko, who now seemed at peace, had been highly strung when she was younger and struggled with social situations. She'd rarely had relationships. The fact that both Rika and Reiko had low self-esteem and found it difficult to rely on men perhaps had something to do with their relationships with their fathers. Manako Kajii, on the other hand, had adored her father, who had passed away several years ago, as if he were a lover, and was said to have been very close to him. That said, Rika also understood the sense of loneliness and wretchedness shared by those who had been deceived by Kajii. She had no intention of aligning herself with such a woman or driving nails into the coffin of those who were already dead. Her recent experience at Reiko's had reminded Rika of just how much comfort the thoughtfulness and homemade food of another person could bring to a tired body and dried-up heart. She could understand thinking that a person's appearance and personality didn't matter, that it didn't even matter if you were being deceived, that you just wanted a soft, warm-bodied member of the opposite sex to call your own. And yet, she thought, and yet. But when Rika tried to carry her train of thought any further, she brushed up against a rough, sore sensation like running her fingertips across sandpaper. It seemed that an anger she'd forgotten about for so long, kept sealed up all this time, was peeping through a crack in her skin. She didn't know who the bad feeling was directed towards. Was it contemporary society she was angry with, for still demanding that women be good around the house as a matter of course? She herself never cooked a meal for a man, and had never been asked to do so either, and yet. Rika turned over the envelope lying on her desk where she imagined you had tossed it, light as a petal, and stifled a shriek. On the reverse of the envelope was printed the address of Tokyo Detention House. The letter was from Manako Kajii, it had to be. Until now, she'd not received a single letter from her, and yet Rika felt certain. Making sure that nobody was watching, she used a letter opener on the envelope. Inside was a single pale pink sheet of paper. "You seem different from other journalists. I'd be happy to meet you. Feel free to come and see me whenever suits you. Regards." That was all the note said. Rika could see the stamp from the prison censor. Kajii's handwriting was mesmerizingly neat, with a rhythmical, fluid quality to it. She has beautiful writing, several people who knew her had testified, and truly she did. Rika's heart was thumping in her chest. She swallowed the impulse to make a noise. The room around her grew white and hazy. What had happened to bring this about? She recalled the letter she'd written to Kajii last week, one of several she'd already written. The only difference from her earlier missives was that, as Reiko had advised, she'd added a postscript at the bottom of the letter PS. "I'm really curious about the recipe for the beef stew that you made for Mr. Yamamura. I'd be delighted if you'd share it with me." On her phone, Rika checked the visiting hours for Tokyo Detention House, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., with an hour break for lunch. If she left now, she'd get there by 10. She had no guarantee that Kajii would meet her, yet she felt she couldn't bear to be still. "I'll be back in time for the meeting," she called out to Kitamura and Yu, sticking her arms into her trench coat as she rushed out of the office. Tensing her skin against the biting wind, she hurried towards Kagurazaka Station. Was she better aiming for Iase or Kosuge Station? After deliberating a moment, she decided to change onto the Chiyoda line at Otemakai and get off at Iase. Once past Kitasenja Station, the train emerged above ground and light flooded the carriage. Past the bridge over the Arakawa River, the enormous detention house building came into view, four towers arranged concentrically around a central tower with a lift running up and down. Seen from above, it resembled a bat with spread wings. Rika got out at Iase Station and hailed a taxi. The Iase River, once known as the dirtiest in all Japan, had been cleaned up considerably. Even with the windows open and the breeze rushing in, there was no nasty stench. The taxi crossed the river, drove in a semicircle around the detention house, and headed towards the visitors' entrance. This part of Tokyo had a melancholy feel to it, but it wasn't bleak. There were houses and apartment blocks dotted around with washing strung up outside, and in a park next to the detention house, mothers and children were laughing and playing together. Opposite the gate, a grassy riverbank stretched on, and beyond the Arakawa River you could see Tokyo's skytree glinting. Rika got out of the taxi, passed through the prison gates staffed by security personnel, and hastened up the slope that led inside. Because many of the prisoners awaiting trial had considerable social influence, the buildings were fitted with cutting-edge technological equipment. Rika filled in the visitor form on the ground floor and waited for the number on the piece of paper in her hand to be called. 30 minutes later, her number appeared on a screen and was announced over a loudspeaker. Entrusting all her possessions save a pen and notepad to a member of staff, she passed through the metal detectors, then walked down a long corridor towards the brightly illuminated hall with lifts that connected the various parts of the building. When the lift doors opened, Rika found her way to the room with the number she'd been given. Opening the door, she found a small room partitioned by an acrylic screen. On the opposite side of the screen stood a single chair. As she sat down gingerly on the metal chair on her side of the screen, it occurred to Rika that at this very moment, she was being watched by Manako Kajii from outside the room. She felt her whole body tense up at the thought. It was now that Kajii would decide whether or not to meet her visitor. The nerves that came from being sized up by a prisoner were something that Rika could never get used to, however many times she experienced them. "Sorry to keep you waiting." Kajii entered the room accompanied by a male prison officer. With her plump hands clasped in front of her waist, she bowed in Rika's direction. Her high-pitched voice had a sugary sweetness to it. There was something intensely graceful about her entrance, as though the curtains had been raised and the princess had emerged to present herself, which felt at odds with the bleakness of the setting. "It's great to meet you. I'm Rika Machida, a journalist on the Shumi Weekly. I came straight away when I got your letter. Thank you for taking the time to see me." The woman settled herself down on the chair on the other side of the acrylic screen. The prison officer waited behind her. "Nice to meet you. I'm Manako Kajii. She's not that ugly or that fat either." Taking extreme care not to be rude, Rika observed the woman opposite her. She may have spent most of her time alone in her cell, but perhaps owing to the 3-calorie-controlled meals a day that she was served at set times and the regular exercise she was encouraged to take, she looked considerably slimmer than at the time of her arrest. Ample she may have been, but she was small in stature, meaning the impression she gave was not an imposing one. She had a feminine quality to her, and it was only her dark eyebrows on the verge of joining in the middle and her big round eyes no less extreme in their darkness that gave her face a stubborn cast. She wore a long skirt of a soft fabric and a salmon-pink jumper that stretched taut across her breasts. The hair cascading down onto her jumper shone glossily, the tips lightly curled. It must have been forbidden in the prison to wear makeup, but her flawless ivory skin seemed to glow from the inside, and her plump, baby doll mouth was pale pink in color. Quite possibly she looked fresher than Rika, whose hair was pulled back into a bun and whose only beauty regime consisted of applying BB cream to her tired skin. Yet Kajii looked older than her 35 years. There was something overwhelmingly old-fashioned about her, although that same quality could be described as a kind of class or poise. The fact of her imprisonment seemed to lend her a sense of nobility. Rika imagined that her feeling right now was not unlike that of the prince when he finally got to meet Rapunzel, sequestered away at the top of the tower. The sense of being on the back foot that came from pleading with Kajii and finally being permitted to meet her, mingled with a sense of gratitude that she alone had been selected from the other journalists, and Rika found herself wanting to think well of the woman before her. She tried to tell herself that she had to remain unbiased. In the end, though, it was Kajii who spoke first. Her eyes like ripe black grapes opened wide and she said, "I've no intention whatsoever of speaking of my case. That position is in line with the counsel I've received from my lawyer and everyone supporting me. But you want to talk about food, am I right? So I thought that meeting you might prove a nice distraction. I don't have anyone around me I can talk to about such things. I'm absolutely starved for conversation about delicious food. So long as it's just as my conversational partner, I don't mind if you continue to come here." While she was thrown off by Kajii's affected way of speaking, Rika also found herself troubled by the contents of her speech. She shouldn't have pretended to be like Reiko, she thought, when she had so little knowledge about food, and she knew that it would take Kajii a long time to open up to her. She could hardly strike up a conversation about the convenience store on a joyride she'd eaten for breakfast. "To start, why don't you tell me what you have in your refrigerator at home?" Rika was relieved to be asked a question. The length of prison visits depended on how busy it was on a given day, and while they were sometimes cut off at 10 minutes, they could last for as long as 30. In any case, conversation seen as time-wasting was not permitted. At the same time, She felt that this was not a good start for their first ever conversation. Let's see. There's fruit and vegetable juice, some sports drinks, and some margarine. I'm not the type to put time and effort into cooking like you are. I'm not good with my hands, and I hate anything domestic. My entire day is taken up by my work. I was so surprised to read your blog and see how much love and care you pour into everyday tasks. Rika could see how brazen she was being in her flattery, but she couldn't stop herself. Being around this woman, she felt herself to be a kind of court jester who had to offer up something diverting to her. Kajii's thick unibrow shot upwards. Did you just say margarine? Yes, it's lower in calories than butter. And isn't it better for you because it has less cholesterol? And besides, you know there's a butter shortage going on at the moment. Your problem is you've decided that butter is bad without even understanding what it tastes like. Margarine is far worse for your body than any butter. It's all fake, full of trans-saturated fats. Listen, the thing you must know about dairy products is. With her voice faintly trembling, Kajii launched into a diatribe on the poisonous effects of margarine. Her eyes grew darker and a frown surfaced on her face. Oh yes, Rika thought, this was just what her blog was like. While she spoke endlessly about good breeding and behaving in a ladylike fashion, Kajii was quick to look down on people, watching out for her chance to scorn others over some trivial issue. Her words, just as smooth as cream, were laced with ferocity. All of a sudden, she fell into a sullen silence. I've got to say something, Rika thought, but the moment she started to move her dry tongue, Kajii resumed her monologue. I learned from my late father that women should show generosity towards everyone. But there are two things that I simply cannot tolerate: feminists and margarine. Rika smiled uncomfortably and murmured, then I should apologize. You must make yourself rice with butter and soy sauce. For a moment, Rika failed to process Kajii's words, and she let out a quiet, add butter and soy sauce to freshly cooked rice. Even someone who doesn't cook can manage that much, I'm sure. It's the best meal to truly understand the glory of butter. Her manner of delivery was so grave that it made it impossible to even think of ridiculing her. I want you to use salted Ekire butter. There's an Ekire shop in Marunouchi Station. Go there and look at it properly before you buy it. The current shortage is a perfect opportunity to sample first-class butter from overseas. When I'm eating good butter, I feel somehow as though I were falling. Falling? Yes. Not floating gently upwards, but falling. The same feeling as when the lift plunges towards the ground floor. The body plummets, starting from the very tip of the tongue. Rika attempted to recall the feeling of gravity that she'd experienced in the lift she'd just ridden. So sucked in was she by Kajii's way of speaking that she'd forgotten to take any notes. Now, she was startled to notice Kajii's eyes and lips growing moist. Her entranced gaze was directed somewhere else, someplace that wasn't this room. The butter should still be cold. Remove it from the fridge just before. Superior quality butter should be eaten when it's still cold and hard, to truly luxuriate in its texture and aroma. It will begin to melt almost immediately with the heat of the rice, but I want you to eat it before it melts fully. Cool butter and warm rice. First of all, savor the difference in their temperatures. Then, the two will melt alongside one another, mingle together, and form a golden fountain, right there inside your mouth. Even without seeing it, you just know that it's golden. That's the way it tastes. You'll sense the individual grains of rice coated in butter, and an aromatic fragrance, as if the rice were being fried, will ascend to your nose. A rich, milky sweetness will spread itself across your tongue. Rika felt her mouth growing moist. She knew that if she swallowed now, she'd let out a loud gulp, which she very much wished to avoid. Kajii sat up straight and clasped her plump fingers in front of her chest. If I speak to you again, it will most likely be after you've decided that you will never again let margarine pass your lips. I wouldn't like to waste my time on anyone except those who know the real thing when they see it. Oh, and one last matter. It's not beef stew, it's beef bourguignon. It's a French recipe. I corrected them several times in court. I'm astounded by how ignorant you all are when it comes to food. I'm tired now. Would you mind if we broke off here? Rika hurriedly jotted down the unfamiliar recipe name. It was usually the prison officer who signaled the end of the visit, but this time Kajii herself voted to end the session. Embarrassingly, Rika had been carried along entirely at Kajii's pace, from start to finish. Kajii was in the starring role, and everyone else was the supporting cast. Was that how it was? Rika stared in bewilderment at the fleshy back and glossy hair of the retreating figure now making its way out of the room. Back in the lift, Rika recalled Kajii's description of the taste of butter. It tastes like you're falling. In truth, Rika didn't really understand what that meant. She walked down the same long corridor as when she'd arrived and put the prison grounds behind her, heading to Kosuge, the station closest to the detention house. Just as after she'd been swimming, her body felt heavy and her head wasn't working properly. She felt like she wanted to fall to the ground and sleep, but she summoned what remaining energy she had. Walking along, she noticed a spot where someone had laid flowers beneath the guardrail at the side of the road. Some unfortunate soul must have had their life cut short immediately after their release from the detention house, she thought. Or else, it was a member of the public who had happened to meet their end in an accident here. The sight of those two round eyes like black grapes and the sound of that sickly sweet voice were trapped inside Rika's chest. She boarded the train, still feeling giddy and unreal. Before returning to the office, Rika stopped at an electronics store and bought the smallest rice cooker she could find, along with a kilo of rice. Once the editorial meeting was over, she had to go out to Kasumigaseki to research a story, which gave her the opportunity to stop at Marunouchi Station. In the Ekire butter shop, which looked like a fancy boutique, she bought a pat of butter that cost almost 1,000 yen for just 100 grams. Never before had Rika spent that kind of money on ingredients. Both the label on the butter and the blue carrier bag she was handed had a pretty, romantic design, not the sort of thing you'd expect from a food item. She regretted that she hadn't thought to take Reiko a gift like this when she'd visited the previous week. The cashier gave Rika a sachet of refrigerant to make sure the butter didn't melt, and when she got back to work, she put it in the office fridge. She felt as though she were accumulating equipment for going into battle. That evening, Rika took the various items home to her Idabashi apartment, 15 minutes walk from the office. It had been a long time since she'd returned home this early. From tomorrow until the end of the weekend, she'd be so busy that she'd barely have the chance to catch her breath, so she needed to see to this task immediately. Rika knew that it had been an oversight on her part not to prepare topics of conversation that Kajii would be interested in. That said, Kajii hadn't explicitly stated that she wouldn't meet her again. In other words, there was a chance that she would open up to Rika, depending on Rika's approach. Standing in front of her kitchen sink, which looked as new as it had done when she moved in 10 years earlier, Rika washed one go of rice, using her wrists to apply pressure. She programmed the rice cooker, fresh out of its box, to cook the rice and let her eyes rove around the place. It was rare for her to spend any time in her apartment, which she had chosen for its proximity to the office and which cost her 85,000 a month in rent. She wasn't especially taken with it, but neither could she see any reason to move. The curtains and bed covers were the pale blue-gray ones that Reiko had helped her choose back in her first year at the company. When the rice cooker began to emit a sweet smell, Rika felt a sense of industriousness rising up in her. For the first time in what seemed to her an age, she dusted the flat. It was as she was vacuuming that the rice cooker beeped. Lifting the lid, Rika saw the rice glistening beyond the plume of steam. Quite unexpectedly, she found herself entranced by the sight of its translucent gleam. She didn't own any rice bowls, so she used the plastic paddle that came with the cooker to spoon the rice messily into a café au lait bowl. Next, she retrieved the butter, which she'd kept in the fridge as Kajii had stipulated, peeled off the wrapping paper, and gazed at its smooth, buttercup-hued surface. What lay ahead was unknown territory. She had sampled the buttered rice that was sometimes served with burger patties, but she'd never encountered rice with soy sauce and butter, let alone piping hot rice with top-class butter. She perched a sliver of butter on top of the rice. From one of the sachets of soy sauce that came with convenience store bento boxes, and which tended to accumulate in her apartment, she squeezed a single drop into the bowl. Just as instructed, she moved the butter and some rice to her mouth before the butter had a chance to melt. The first thing Rika felt was a strange breeze emanating from the back of her throat. The cold butter first met the roof of her mouth with a chilly sensation, contrasting with the steaming rice in both texture and temperature. The cool butter clashed against her teeth, and she felt its soft texture right down into their roots. Soon enough, just as Kajii had said, the melted butter began to surge through the individual grains of rice. It was a taste that could only be described as golden. A shining golden wave, with an astounding depth of flavor and a faint yet full and rounded aroma, wrapped itself around the rice and washed Rika's body far away. It was, indeed, a lot like falling. Rika stared down intently at the bowl of rice with butter and soy sauce and let out a long sigh, feeling her breath rich and milky. The meal that Reiko had cooked her was so delicious that Rika could still now recall every part of the sensation of eating it. Its fragrance, its restrained yet impactful flavors, had seemed to gently embrace her exhausted body. The seasonal ingredients had filled her with a sense of vitality that had carried over to the following day. This was a different kind of deliciousness to that, a more blatant, forceful deliciousness that took hold of her from the tip of her tongue, pinned her down, and carried her off to some unknown place. The next thing Rika knew, all the rice had vanished inside her stomach. And Rika wasn't done eating. In fact, it seemed that with every bite of butter and rice, her taste buds were developing new capacities, pleading with her for more. So this was the butter that Manako Kajii loved so much, the symbol of all the delicious food she'd eaten with the money she'd extracted from her men. It was the same cruel, bright yellow as the butter that the tigers had melted into in the story of Little Babaji. Rika got to her feet. Reiko had told her she should eat more, and she was skinny enough as it was, possibly too skinny, in fact. Nobody could blame her for treating herself occasionally. Besides, this was part of her research. If this would endear Kajii to her, then she had little choice in the matter. Placing the still warm metal cooking pot in the sink, Rika turned on the tap and ran a stream of water across it. The surging water cooled the bowl. She would cook another go of rice. No, make it 2. Was that too much? If there was some left over, she could always freeze it. Glancing at the clock, Rika saw it was already long past midnight.